Now here's an interesting fact. What do you think the 9/11 Commission reported about that? To date, the U.S. government, and this is in quotes, to date, the U.S. government has not been able to determine the origin of the money used for the 9/11 attacks. Ultimately, the question is of little practical significance. Next part of the official story. They were directed by Osama bin Laden from a cave in Afghanistan. Well, if you look on FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, you'll see that even though Osama is listed as one of the top 10 most wanted fugitives with ties to the U.S. embassy bombings in Africa back in 1998, there's no mention of 9/11. Now why is that? The biggest crime he ever committed. Because according to FBI spokesman Rex Toon, in quotes, the FBI has no hard evidence connecting Osama bin Laden to 9/11. And yet the White House blames him for orchestrating the attacks. Don't they believe the FBI? Osama was reportedly receiving kidney dialysis at the American hospital in Dubai in July 2001, just before the attacks. That was according to the Times of India. And they even said that the CIA station chief visited him in hospital, at the American hospital. Just keeping tabs on him, I guess. One day before 9/11, that's September the 10th, 2001, guess where Osama was then? In a Pakistani army hospital in Rawalpindi, at least if you can believe Dan Rather of CBS. That was one day before the attacks. So the next day, he must have made it to the caves in Afghanistan. Okay, next part of the official story is they hijacked 4 commercial airliners with knives and box cutters. Well, let's have a look at the evidence that we were given. What evidence has the U.S. government actually provided to prove that 19 Arabs hijacked 4 commercial passenger planes on 9/11? Well, A, a passport found at Ground Zero. Now, how could a paper passport have survived that inferno? B, video clips of various airports or air terminals before 9/11. But why didn't any of these Arab names appear on the passenger manifests of United Airlines and American Airlines? C, Mohammed Atta's will and other incriminating evidence, they call it the Quran in the van, found in Atta's unloaded baggage. Now, why would you pack your will on a trip to martyrdom when you know your plane was going to crash? D, a passport and red bandana found at Shanksville's United 93 crash site in pristine condition. How could those items survive the crash when everything else disappeared into the hole? E, a series of bin Laden confession tapes. Warnings of future attacks after 9/11. Why does Osama appear to have a broader nose and look so different now? If you'll notice that the big video confession tape that came out that really got a lot of reaction was that one that had this fellow on the right-hand side of your screen saying that, yes, he did 9/11 and that he was going to be doing more terrorist attacks. But does that look like Osama bin Laden to you? He must have had a face shot. Well, the other big bit of evidence was that around 40 phone calls from the airliners, including the famous one from Barbara Olson. However, if you were following the Zacharias Moussaoui trial back in March of 2006, all but 2 of those calls were dismissed as real at that trial. Now, Professor Keith Dewdney, who's here tonight, and our host, is one of the people who has done some groundbreaking work on that topic, proving that cell phone calls over 8,000 feet back in 2001 were next to impossible. The phone calls to relatives were all probably faked using voice morphing, which was actually a technology well established by them and proved to members of Congress. So those phone calls, there's a lot of debate about that. We have a great article in issue 13 on that as well. Also, None of the 4 airliners transmitted the simple hijack code that pilots use when their plane is being hijacked. It literally takes just a split second for you to flip the button if you're the pilot, and yet it didn't happen 4 out of 4 times. However, the technology to remotely control 757s and 767s was fully developed in the 1970s to rescue commercial aircraft in the event of an attempted hijacking. It's called home run technology. This raises some very interesting questions. Why wasn't it used on September the 11th? To take those planes back under control of the FAA or NORAD and land them at a military base to arrest all those guys. On the other hand, if the systems were used to control the aircraft and pilot them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, who was at the controls? How did they get access to the secret codes? The next part of the official story is they took the North American Air Defense Command, or NORAD, completely by surprise, flying 2 of them into the Twin Towers. I don't think so. USA Today reported that in the 2 years before the attacks, NORAD conducted exercises using hijacked airliners as weapons, and one target was the World Trade Center. Here's the cover of the FEMA response manual back in 1997. If that doesn't look like obvious that that was a possible target, I don't know what is. Also, the Pentagon had Operation Mascal, simulating a plane crash into the Pentagon 11 months prior to 9/11 in October 2000. So they were prepared for it. And in March 2006, during the Moussaoui trial, several items made headlines, including FBI agents stating that the Bureau was aware years beforehand that al-Qaeda planned to use planes as bombs to destroy important buildings. One of Bush's presidential daily briefings given to Bush at his ranch when he was on holidays 1 month before 9/11 was entitled, "Bin Laden Determined to Strike Inside the USA." That was in July 2001. So why did they say they were completely surprised? Well, routine procedures in which fighter jets intercept off-course aircraft were not applied to the 4 hijacked airlines that day. Because if you look at the stats, in a 9-month period just prior to June of 2001, there were at least 67 fighter jet scrambles called by the FAA. However, the number of fighter jet scrambles fell to 0 during the 3 months prior to September the 11th. That was partly because of a change in command. Rumsfeld was in charge at that point of making the call on whether or not to intercept. And I guess he decided that he wasn't going to call anything. Why waste the taxpayers' money? On September the 11th, there was an unprecedented number of major military air defense drills going on at the same time as 9/11, some mimicking hijacked airliners being flown into the buildings. In full progress were these drills. Several high-ranking military officials have stated that these drills played havoc with the tracking of the hijacked flights. Many involved did not know if they were real-world or exercise. At one point, they were looking at 29 separate reports of hijackings in the system. And we know there were 4 real ones. There might have been a 5th, I don't know. But they were looking at 29. Well, who scheduled all those war games to coincide on 9/11, which would make America so vulnerable that day? Well, 5 months before 9/11, Dick Cheney was placed in charge of seamless coordination of all federal and military exercises related to terrorism. One such game, called Global Guardian, was rescheduled from being played out in October or November and moved back to the week of September the 11th. One wonders why.